Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Church of Christ, and I am a theology professor. This is a podcast on the Star Coast Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 72, and we're talking about Lumen Gentium 30 to 31 on the laity in the church. So this is starting a new chapter on the laity. As we get into these numbers today, we're going to define what we mean by the laity. So I won't give you a definition now. My first draft had one here, but I decided to put it later because we kind of defined it in the text. So if you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday we concluded chapter 3 on restoring the permanent diaconate and the duties of the deacons. Now today we're going to define what laity is and what pertains to them, particularly their mission of sanctifying the temporal or secular order. So let's get into paragraph 30. Paragraph 30 is on certain things that pertain to the lay state. It's kind of setting us up. 31a will give us an exact definition. So this is a setup for that. So let's read the text. Having set forth the function of the hierarchy, the Sacred Council gladly turns its attention to the state of those faithful called laity. Everything that has been said above concerning the people of God is intended for the laity, religious, and clergy alike. But there are certain things that pertain a special way to the laity, both men and women, by reason of their condition and mission. Due to the special circumstance of our time, the foundations of this doctrine must be more thoroughly examined. For their pastors know how much the laity contribute to the welfare of the entire church. They also know that they are not ordained by Christ to take upon themselves alone the entire salvific mission of the church toward the world. On the contrary, they understand that it is their noble duty to shepherd the faithful and to recognize their ministries and charisms, so that all, according to their proper roles, may cooperate in this common understanding with one mind. For we all must practice the truth in love, and so grow up in all things in Him who is head, Christ. For from Him the whole body, being closely joined and knit together through every joint of the system, according to the functioning in due measure of each single part, derives its increase to the building up of itself in love. So right there, it kind of gives a kind of distinction here when it starts off as talking about laity, clergy, and religious. Right? So a clergy means someone who's ordained. Anyone who has received the sacrament of orders in the level of diaconate or above is clergy. Anyone who's made profession of vows is religious. Is a religious, right? So I am both clergy and religious. I've made vows in the Church of Christ. I was ordained a priest, right? And the laity, the first definition of laity is not pertaining to either of those. Now, that's obviously a negative definition. And I think when the next paragraph, when we get into detail, I'll give you a little bit more because I think there is also a positive definition of the lay vocation, not just kind of like not clergy, not religious, because that is a very first one, right? Laity are a lack of, the absence of being clergy or religious. Sometimes you'll even hear things like the lay clergy or the secular clergy referred to diocesan clergy as opposed to religious. It gets confusing. But here we're talking about the laity, which are neither priest nor religious. And it's somewhat new to talk about this. If you go back to, say, my grandparents' generation when they were young, there was kind of the idea that, if you want to be holy, become a nun, become a priest. But if you're just going to be lay people, just, pray, pay, and obey kind of thing. That was kind of a lot of the attitude beforehand. But what Vatican II is really bringing out is that each lay person is called to that holiness, is called to great holiness. And we see this, especially we've seen since John Paul II, there's been a lot more canonization of lay saints, right? We have a lot of saints from our own time, right? You have people like Gianna Molla, who was a doctor who sacrificed herself so that her baby could die. She could have had some treatment for something, but it would have killed her unborn child, so she decided to forego that treatment, knowing it would probably result in their death, right? You have Pier Giorgio Frassati, the one out there. He's going to be canonized this year. So he's, you have Cara Lucia Badano, who was a young woman who underwent, I think it was cancer. I think it was leukemia, but don't quote me on that. It was definitely like a cancer thing, and died relatively young. You have people like Jerome Lejeune, the guy who scientists discovered that the third copy of chromosome 21 is what causes Down syndrome, and fought against the idea that we should use this to abort babies with Down syndrome, which which probably cost him a Nobel Prize in science, because he was definitely he was probably in line for that. We're not 100% sure, but most likely. And so they contribute to the entire church, right? this is the most of the church are laity, right? They're, the priests, the religious were a minority. The exact percentage might vary times and places, but we've always been a minority. And here it talks about how we as shepherds need to understand your ability. We understand your charism, gifts, etc., right? We realize people have different skills, right? I was just looking at, as today when I was recording this, I was looking at gifts for my nieces and nephews to get them gifts. And I was looking at different saint books. And I was trying to find saints that match their temperament, personality, interests, right? Because I have different nieces and nephews who would be very, one would be super interested in a scientist saying, the other one would be like, that wouldn't interest them. And that's just the reality of having different kids, right? So moving on to paragraph 31, it has two subparagraphs. 31A is what is the laity, and they share the mission of Jesus. And paragraph 31B is a little longer. It talks about the lay mission of sanctifying the temporal or secular order. So let's read A. The term laity is here understood to mean all the faithful except those in holy orders or those in a state of religious life specifically approved by the church. These faithful are by baptism made one body with Christ and are constituted among the people of God. They are in their own way made the sharers in the priestly, prophetic, and kingly functions of Christ, and carry out for their own part the mission of the whole Christian people in the church and the world, right? So this is really, we start off with that negative definition, which I kind of gave you beforehand, but that's not all. You have those functions as a baptized person. You're a priest, prophet, and king. Priest, you offer your sacrifice, right? So the idea of the offertory mass is that everyone who's there, not just the priest, is offering their little sacrifices throughout the week, throughout the day, to prepare the sacrifice. It's not just the sacrifice of bread and wine. It's a prophet. Prophets are proclaiming truth. And then king, we are leading Christians, leading that idea, right? And this is a mission that they get as laity. It's not just it doesn't matter. No, once you're married, you're kind of set to be laity, unless I guess technically you can be permanent deacons and things like that. But you get married, and so you are set to be a lay person, right? You're not going to become a religious. You can't be married and be a religious. You can't be married and be a priest or bishop, right? And so that is setting you on that mission, and you are going to be holy by living that vocation, living that mission, right? So it's things like I do as a priest, that were proper to me and my vocation, help me live my holiness. And I would suggest different things for siblings who are married and things like that, right? All my siblings are married with kids. Anyway, so we're going on to 31B. It talks about the lay mission of sanctifying the temporal or secular order. Let's read it. What specifically characterizes the laity is their secular nature. It is true that those in holy orders can at times be engaged in secular activities and even have a secular profession. But they are, by reason of their particular vocation, especially and professedly ordained to the sacred ministry. Similarly, by their state in life, religious give splendid and striking testimony to the world, cannot be transformed and offered to God without the spirit of the Beatitudes. But the laity, by their very vocation, seek the kingdom of God by engaging in temporal affairs and by ordering them according to the plan of God. They live in the world, that is, in each and in all of the secular professions and occupations. They live in the ordinary circumstances of family and social life, from which the very web of their existence is woven. They are called there by God, that by exercising their proper function and led by the Spirit of the gospel, they may work for the sanctification of the world from within as leaven. In this way, they make Christ known to others, especially by the testimony of a life resplendent in faith, hope, and charity. Therefore, since they are tightly bound up in all types of temporal affairs, it is their special task to order and to throw light upon those affairs in such a way that they may come into being and continually increase according to Christ, to the praise of the Creator and the Redeemer. So, right, that's there, right? So, a little thing here, they use temporal and secular interchangeably here. They are relatively interchangeable. Secular just means not religious. And it doesn't necessarily mean in a kind of anti-religious way. I have, a brother-in-law who's a lawyer, and he has a secular profession. He defends people who are accused of crimes and things like that. I have another brother who's an IT manager. He fixes computers and things like that. That's a secular profession. It's not a religious profession, right? But they're both good Catholics, go to mass all the time and things like that. And so the idea of secular here just simply means not religious. And temporal refers to, it comes from the idea of time, this time and space. and not the kind of things of the world beyond, right? So they're both kind of related there. They have a different root of what their meaning is, but they're contextually, they're both pretty similar. So that's why I've used them a little bit interchangeably. And we as priests and religious can contribute, but it's not our primary mission, right? So, for example, in the seminary, we have some professors who are lay professors of theology, right? And I'm also a professor of theology. And so, you don't need to be a priest to teach theology to seminarians, but the seminary does want to have some of the professors be priests, right? Because it shows that model of priesthood, for the seminarians. And so there are aspects of my responsibilities that could be done by lay people, right? And that's fine. I mean, it's great we have lay theology professors. I mean, it's a tough thing to take up as a lay person because the pay to support a family is really tough. That's a whole other issue that we could discuss somewhere else. A lot of my lay colleagues are really really struggle. So whenever you see somebody like that, almost definitely, unless they're like a top professor at Notre Dame, they're not making a ton of money, despite what you might think. Anyways, and you live ordinary social and family life, right? You go to the local social events, you're involved in the town things, especially this is visible in small towns. My dad is a realtor, and he, and so you go to the local hockey rink. Yes, they're Canadian, right? And there's an ad on the hockey rink, at least there used to be, that says if you have real estate, call Paul Schneider, right? That's, if you need real estate, he's going to help you out. And he's involved, so everybody there knows who he is. So it's you see the ad, but you also know him as a person, right? And that's good. And there's nothing wrong with, doing that. And he helped a lot of people get homes and, things like that. And then you have to be led by the gospel, doing the light of the gospel. It's always in the light of the gospel. It's always that return to the gospel. And that is why it notes at the end that there has to be that testimony of life, right? So many people are moved to goodness by viewing other people. Honestly, I think the number one thing we have to show for better marriages is those couples who are 40, 50, 60 years married, and they're still so happy, still so joyful, because that's the biggest motivation. That's the biggest lesson we can have for people to have, healthy, happy, long-term marriages and things like that. So hopefully this is helpful. Thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. I do this podcast on a volunteer basis, and my local religious community relies on donations to help pay our bills. If you want to support my community, you can go to patreon.com/frmatthewlc. There's also a link for a one-time donation on my own site, frmatthewlc.com. And you can also donate to support StarQuest at skpn.com/give. Tomorrow, we're going to continue with the next paragraph of Lumen Gentium, which is 32, on the diversity of the gifts of the laity, because each layperson has different gifts. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which provides a blueprint for the Catholic Church. Go to skpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X for more information on the podcast, such as playlists for individual documents and a reading plan.